Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 53rd day. For the 53rd day of the 108th Legislature First Session, our chaplain for today is Reverend Brenda Peters from Unity of Omaha, from Senator Wendy DeBoer's district. Please rise.
I invite you all to join me in prayer. Gathered here today, we first bless this space, infusing it with harmony, love, and unity. And we also bless all who are gathered here today, infusing them also with harmony, love, and unity, and giving them the strength and the courage for the work that is before them. We also honor those who have come before us, having the foresight to show the country that we can work together as one. And we also give gratitude for those of you who are here doing the hard work, gratitude for your sacrifices, your service, your passion, and your commitment to the state of Nebraska. And we also give gratitude for the blessings that we have and the blessings yet to come. And so it is. Amen.
I recognize Specialist 4th Class Ronald Leishman from the 145th Aviation Battalion, Army, Lincoln, Nebraska, from Senator Elliott Bostar's district.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 53rd day of the 108th Legislature First Session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
There are no corrections this morning.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Motions to be printed from Senator Hunt to LB 11, LB 14, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 35, Senator Hunt to LB 50, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 61, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 63, Senator Hunt to LB 71 and 77, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh to LB 78. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Wishart, you are recognized for a personal point of privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I think this might be the first time I've ever done a personal point of privilege, but I think this announcement is really worth it. Senator Cavanaugh gave us a preview of this, but yesterday we got word that Senator Slama passed the bar. which is just a huge feat to do, not only in itself, but also to do it while she's serving in the legislature. And I've been thinking about this yesterday and then over the evening, how important it is to lift up these moments for everybody, but especially for young women, to see the ability to serve your state and also move your career forward. So congratulations, Senator Slama. So proud of you, and looking forward to seeing what you're doing in the future, not only in your public service, but also in your career. Congratulations.
Senator Slama would also like to introduce Dr. Rob Rhodes of Eagle, Lincoln, who is serving as our family physician of the day under the north balcony. Senator Bostar would also like to welcome Betty Leishman, wife of Ronald Leishman, who led our Pledge of Allegiance this morning, and Eric Leishman, son of Ronald Leishman, and they are seated under the south balcony. Welcome. Mr. Clerk, first item.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 754, introduced by Senator Linehan at the request of the governor. It's a bill for enacting revenue and taxation, amend section 7727-1503 and 7727-3402. Reduces individual and corporate income tax rates as prescribed and repeals the original section. The bill was read for the first time on January 18th of this year and referred to the Revenue Committee. The committee amendments have since been divided to AM 1063 and AM 1064. There is a amendment from Senator Von Gillern that has been adopted. The first division of the committee amendments are pending, as well as a Senator DeBoer amendment to those amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan, you are given 2 minutes to refresh us on LB 754 and AM 1063.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. So the part we're on right now, once it was divided, was the income tax rate deductions. Part of it is just paying for what we did last year, which took 6.84 to 5.84 over a number of years. Now we're taking it down to 399 would be the top bracket over, I think it's 3 or 4 years. So that is the goal here. That part is the income tax. The rest of the package, which I hope we get to this morning, is to adopt the Child Care Tax Credit Act and reauthorize the School Readiness Tax Credit Act, which is Senator Bostar's. I covered that part. Provide an income tax adjustment relating to federal retirement annuities, which is Senator Blood's bill, which takes care of the people that aren't on Social Security, which are being left out of the changes we made on Social Security. Change provisions related to taxation of Social Security benefits, which is Senator Kyle's bill, which pays. So last year we were going to do away with tax on Social Security over a couple of years. Now we're going to do it this year. Also, then there's Senator Von Gillern's LB 492, which increases the rate of deductions for certain research and experimental expenditures. And also another Bostar and Kyle's bill that clarifies our law that if you come to Nebraska for 15 days out of a year, whether it be for a board meeting or training or sales meeting, that you are not taxed because you're working in Nebraska if you're here for 15 days or less. And then finally, the SALT fix is all in the bill. And I'm here if anybody has any questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk, for an amendment.
Mr. President, first of all, Senator DeBoer, AM 1070, I have a note you have to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, Senator DeBoer would move to offer AM 1092.
Senator DeBoer, you're welcome to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, that little bit of maneuvering was just the amendment that I had put up on the board last night. What had an error in it. This is the correct one that matches what so irreverently I called the BOOP amendment last night. This is the amendment what this does is it says everything Senator Linehan is doing on income taxes, exactly as Senator Linehan is doing them, exactly on the timeline she's doing them. But after all of the income tax cuts have been put in place that Senator Linehan would like, this would then take an additional 0.25% off of the second to highest bracket. So confusingly, that is sometimes called the third bracket because the highest one is the fourth bracket. So I will continue to refer to it as the second to highest because I think that is clear for everyone to understand. So now to refresh, what this amendment does is it says that we are cutting substantially the top income tax rate in the top bracket. And this would say we're going to follow Senator Linehan's lead, and then when we get done with her cuts, we're going to add a tiny bit more for the middle income tax bracket so that we, one, keep some progressivity in our tax code, two, so that we say we recognize we're giving over a 2-year period of bills passed 3% in income tax cuts to the top rate or thereabout. And we are only giving 1% to folks who are in that second to top bracket. And this says we're going to give them 1.25%. So it isn't an even cut. We're not giving the same amount of tax cuts to the highest bracket as we are giving to the second to highest or the sort of middle income earners, but we are making it a little more even out in terms of the numbers between the cuts that we're doing for the highest income earners and some not all that high, but high income earners, higher, and then the folks that are in this area. And to remind everyone, we're talking about folks in this second to top bracket. If you're married filing jointly, this is $53,000 to $74,000 more or less. And if you are single, this would be $36,350. The bottom of that is $25,350. So this is the income bracket, the income range we're talking about here. And the lovely thing about this little additional tax cut is that for all of you, the vast majority of people in your district, if you vote for this, will get an additional tax cut. Everyone who makes $25,350 or more in your district single, and everyone making $53,500 or more if they are married filing jointly will get a tax cut. So voting for this, tax cut for almost everyone in your district. So that's a nice thing. That's a nice thing to give your constituents. It also helps to preserve a very nice kind of distinction between the tax brackets we would end up with at the end when it's all put into place. Our highest rate, 3.99. Our second to highest rate, 3.75. Our third to highest rate, 3.51. So we have a nice kind of even stair step there. And that's really all this amendment does. It recognizes that we're cutting a lot of taxes here. Senator Von Gillern says, let's give the money back to the people of Nebraska. And I say, let's give the money back to the people of Nebraska and let's give it a little more evenly back to the people of Nebraska. And I'm not criticizing anything Senator Linehan is doing. I just think this would be a very nice addition to her bill and would add a little bit more fairness into the way in which we are doing tax cuts here. And that is not a criticism. That is simply just a suggestion that let's think about the folks who are in that middle class tax cut area, that middle class bracket. Sorry, not middle class, I'm sorry, middle income bracket. And let's give them 0.25 more. When folks ask me what it costs, again, We don't have all the numbers, but I'm told it'll be somewhere between $30 and $35 million a year when it's fully implemented. So that'll be the Linehan cuts, and then 4 years out or whatever it is, when hers are fully put into place, we'll add about 30 million, 35 million, whatever it turns out to be at that time, to give those folks who are making between, again, 53,000 and 73,000 or so, married filing jointly, or single 25,000 to 36,000, to give them a little more of a tax cut. And that's what it does. So folks, I would appreciate your vote in support of this motion. And let's get our middle class and the people, middle income, and the people who are earning that amount a little more of a tax cut. And let's bring these tax cuts, all of them, to all of the people who live in our districts. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually am not in disagreement with Senator Boer on what she's trying to do here. What we are always faced with on the Revenue Committee, and this goes back the last 5 or 6 years, is you've got a box that you've got to fit a package into. And the box has to include, this year, our goal is the box includes so much for income taxes, so much for property taxes, so much for school funding, and the Opportunity Scholarship Tax Credit. That's all got to fit in a box. So this amendment, if it's $35 million, would be exactly what Senator Bostar's part of the package is worth. So it's trade-offs. Is this a better deal than the child tax credits? I would ask that we don't add this amendment to the bill this morning, but I will say that if the package can grow, if there is room, I'm not philosophically against this idea. I just don't know how we get it in at this point. There will be, and as I've said this before, unless the world changes dramatically from the time I've been here, there will be this package will probably end up being too big. Maybe not. Maybe forecasters come in and say we got even more money, and that's a possibility. Then we could do more. So I don't know how this fits, or if it can fit. And if we do an additional 35 million, then we have to do it actually, because I know there's ag people out in the rotunda this morning. If we do another 35 on income taxes, we have to do another 35 on property taxes. So it's just, does it fit? Can we make it fit? I am open to those discussions. Okay, with what time I have left this morning, as I think many of you know, at least my staff knows, I get up first, I make my cup of coffee, and I read the paper. So this morning, I read it online. So this morning, I'm reading Nebraska Examiner, which I appreciate. They're not even here. I can't believe it. There's one of our press people. Nebraska Examiner, I read this morning. And there is a story, so I thought I would jump ahead of somebody else handing this out. Job opportunities, not taxes, top of mind when people migrate, UNO researcher says. And I am not picking on UNO here, I'm just reading the headline. So it says there were 2 surveys done, and neither one of the surveys, the taxes come out on top. Like, guess what? Neither one of the surveys gave taxes as an option. So when you do a survey and you don't give people the option, it's unlikely it will come out on top. Just so if you see the headline, we need to read the whole story. And actually, Cindy Gonzalez, who wrote this, did a good job of writing this story, because if you read the whole story, about a third of the way down, it says, taxes are not offered as a specific choice. But there was another category where respondents can specify another factor. She said taxes is not commonly a written response. So I don't know how many people do surveys. I stopped doing them a long time ago because you never know who's doing the survey, and I would suggest people be very careful about answering surveys. But so you're limited in the number of people you get to, and I assume most of us have seen polling here since we've been involved in elections, and we all know there's several ways to manipulate polling. Then it goes down further to the other survey. Again, taxes were not included as a particular question, but in a separate question,
1 minute.
an average of 11% chose taxes, even though taxes wasn't offered. And in the same survey, 16% chose the cost of housing. So you add those two numbers together, because I would say the cost of housing in Nebraska is high because the property taxes are too high. So you add those two together, and it's 27% of the people say taxes and the cost of housing is why they left Nebraska. 27%. It's a high number, folks. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Mosier, you are recognized to speak.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraska. In this discussion of taxes, the discussion has mostly gravitated toward the top rates and the benefits to higher income individuals. And part of this package that so far hasn't been mentioned is the coupling of the Nebraska standard deduction to the federal standard deduction. I don't know, 10 years ago or so, the federal tax plan changed and Nebraska decoupled from the federal tax standard deduction because we couldn't afford it at that point. It was had a really, really big fiscal note. And so for those 10 years, it's been difficult for Nebraskans to get the same deductions on their state income tax return that they could get on their federal. So the federal standard deduction, depending on how many in the family and filing independently or jointly and all, is around $25,000. And currently, the Nebraska standard deduction is 15 something. So by mirroring the federal standard deduction, roughly it's a $10,000 increase in a deduction. And if you look at the tax table, and depending on where you are on the tax table, you move $10,000 down, you save somewhere around $250, $288. So this is savings for low-income filers, lower-income filers, everybody's going to save that $200 or $300 on their tax. So I know yesterday it was talked about that lower-income people might save $11, lower-income taxpayers might save, crazy small amounts of money. But moving $10,000 in the tax table, it's going to save you $250 to $300, depending on where you're at. So again, I know Senator Breezy was talking yesterday about you have to look at this in total in the package. You can't just pick on the things that you don't like. You need to look at the total effect of the change in tax rates. And so I support 754, and I know we're going to come to a vote on this in an hour or so. And I look forward to voting for this and moving it on. Thank you.
Senator Slama, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise today in support of LB 754, and like Senator Linehan, open to what Senator DeBoer is proposing on AM 1092. I want to make sure that we're not compromising funds that could be used for property tax relief for the sake of growing this particular package. And before I really quickly yield my time to Senator Linehan, I would like to briefly thank Senator Wishart for kind words on the mic this morning. We've announced my engagement and now my graduation, my passing of the bar exam on the floor. So it really means a lot to be able to go through these major milestones with everybody, and it's a privilege to work with all of you. So with that, I'll yield my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Linehan, 4 minute 15.
Thank you, Senator Salama, and congratulations. I feel like you're growing up in the legislature. So I want to go back to a few things that were said last night. And I was at least, I don't know if all of you were, but I was getting a little punchy last night. And I'm sorry, Senator Rabel, I didn't have a chance. I should talk to you off the mic here, but we're stacking up this morning. So you mentioned Blueprint Nebraska and that we should read it. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that everybody should look at that. It has several sections of it. I think the total report, not hard copy, but the book was maybe a half an inch thick. This tax package is basically trying to get to exactly what Blueprint said we should go. Lance Fritz, who CEO of Union Pacific, was one of the co-chairmen. Somebody from West, I'm embarrassed to get. Thank you. Owen Palm was the other co-chair. And I met with them a couple times. I've met with other people that worked on it several times, and getting our rate, I think their goal was 4%, but that was written before Iowa went to 399. So when Iowa went to 399, we just shuffled and said we got to at least match Iowa. And in that conversation, and I think if you go back and read the full report, they said we needed to move away from big incentive programs that picked winner and losers. And they also said that we should try to find a way to help young people with taxes and keep them in the state. That's all. And I have read it. So I do want to know that this is not separated from Blueprint. It's actually very much influenced by Blueprint and obviously by Governor Pillen, who's on behalf, I introduced it. The other thing I want to talk about this morning is the fact that we've capped Senator Bostar's part of the child tax credit. Again, that is not because I've raised children, I have several grandchildren. I know how expensive it is. I want to help those families, and that's why I like this. Again, if we put this in and it works, there will be an opportunity in the future to raise it if our revenues are strong. And then I don't know how much time I have left, but I'm going to go to how strong our revenues are. I've got Open Skies briefings for the last 5 or 6 years here, and there's basically every year they say pretty much the same thing. I will read from 22. Below is the state. Today's forecast provides a rosy state revenue picture, but we also know we are in unprecedented times, as was evidenced by the uncertainty expressed by the several forecasting board members in their comments about our economy. Our revenues are being impacted by a range of factors beyond the control of the legislature, such as a massive influx of federal relief dollars, substantial inflation, workforce shortages. Given this new, we are concerned. And it says, if you go back 6 years, they say that same thing, sometimes a little differently, but basically the same thing. So in 2019, well, let's go back to 2018-19. Our revenues were up 8.7%. In 2019-20, our revenues were up 4.8%. In 2021, it turned out the forecast board wasn't being nearly rosy enough. Our revenues were up 13.5%. And in 21-22, the Revenue Office, the Fiscal Office, the Legislature all missed the mark by a lot. Our revenues were up 22.1%. So now, will there be a downturn? There will. There was a downturn before we got here, 2015, 16.
Time, Senator.
Thank you. I'll go back through this if it yields me time. Thank you.
Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple things. I kind of want to reiterate a couple things that were said last night. I appreciate Senator DeBoer and trying to bring things. I'm all in favor of tax cuts, okay? If our taxes were zero, that'd be fine with me, okay? So I'm all about tax cuts. But I'm going to tell you that my biggest concern remains property tax. Property tax, property tax, property tax. Entirely too high. Now, I get the fact that we need to move our headline state income tax rate down to $3.99 to be competitive with the states around us, and I'm fully supportive of that. I agree with the governor. I agree with Senator Linehan. I agree with the Revenue Committee for bringing that. But we absolutely, positively have to reduce our property tax burden. And as Senator Linehan has laid out, this is a comprehensive package. And every dollar of income tax savings has got to be offset also by $1 of property tax savings. And trust me, there are many of us rural senators here who are keeping track. So I'm going to oppose any amendments that have a fiscal note that's going to impact this bill until we get to select file and know exactly what the property tax numbers are going to be. If we get to select and the property tax numbers work and the income tax numbers work, I welcome any amendments at that time to look at tweaks. I have no issues at all with what Senator DeBoer is bringing, other than the fact that I'm not going to let one nickel go until we know where the property tax savings are all. Show me the money on the property tax side. I'm also going to tell you that one of the concerns that I continue to have are the number of people who are nearing retirement. They're going to sell their business, and they're looking at the income tax burden here in this state. And yes, these are going to be higher income because they sell their business, and they're going to pay taxes on that. And what they do, if you're faced with paying almost 7% of the sale of your company in taxes in Nebraska, but you can go to Florida and buy a home in Florida and be there when that sale occurs, and you don't pay that taxes because you're now a resident of Florida, you're probably going to move to Florida. I have a long list of people who have done just that. Florida, Wyoming, South Dakota, take your pick. It happens. It happens all the time. And if they're younger people, I'm saying younger in their mid-50s, and they retire early, many of them start up another business. Guess what? In Florida, not in Nebraska. You can buy an awfully nice house if you sell a business for a substantial amount of money, and you keep 7% of that sale roughly, and you use it to buy a home somewhere else for free. That's what's happening every day. Income taxes matter, but if we want savings for everybody, everybody has to live somewhere, and there are property taxes associated with that home that you live in. Property taxes help everyone. Every income tax, every tax bracket, you get property tax savings. That's where we need to make substantial progress this year. With that, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Linehan because I think she's got more to her story.
Senator Linehan, 1 minute 20.
So again, we've been blessed with incredible revenues. 2021, 13.5%, 21-22, 22.1%. Now, when we did the budget last year, I want you to know that we used zero growth because we're trying to be careful. I didn't agree with zero growth, but I didn't win that argument. So we use zero growth. That is why we have so much money, folks. And what we're basing these figures on going forward, and this tax is 3.5. And in the only years that I've been here, right when I got here, our revenues were flat. Actually went up 0.3%. But nothing in the last, not since 2008, the largest recession, depression, whatever you want to call it, 2008, in decades, have we fallen below what we brought in the year before. It is sustainable. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Senator Raybould, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning, fellow Nebraskans watching us today. I do want to thank Senator DeBoer, and I do support her efforts to come up with a more equitable way of providing a well-deserved tax cut. And I want to thank Senator Linehan. I got so excited when she talked about how can we enhance the child care tax credits even more, because that will be so impactful to Nebraska families. And I want to thank Senator Linehan again about talking about Blueprint Nebraska, which is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. Blueprint Nebraska talks about people, land, location. And it says that these assets have always provided the foundation for Nebraska's success. And despite the fact that we have a tremendous reserve that we are so fortunate to have, Nebraska still faces several challenges, particularly around innovation and talent. We've talked about this before, that Nebraska has difficulty retaining and attracting young talent. We're ranked 39th towards the bottom of our ability to attract and retain our population from 25 to 29-year-olds. And we are losing the war on people talent. We are losing the war. Blueprint Nebraska talked about what we can do to really be that shining example, that shining corporations in our state that can attract and retain our young families. And they talk about encourage the private sector to lead by committing to increasing diversity and inclusion. One of the initiatives it spoke about was trying to have training for company-wide unconscious bias training. But there are more efforts that it talked about on how to end some of the misperception about our beloved state of Nebraska. You know, we are really facing a crisis when it comes to workforce. We have a labor scarcity that is very unappealing to any corporation. Right now, and I believe the numbers have increased, we have 64,000 job openings. Site selectors, and I'm going from Site Selection magazine, say companies are more concerned with skill availability, transportation infrastructure, and other factors with state taxes. How can we attract people? I mean, how can we attract corporations when we don't have people to work in those corporations? That is the fundamental thing. And I love talking about Blueprint Nebraska. And, you know, they say we have to be competitive with our taxes. And I commend Governor Pillen for really doing something very innovative and looking at property taxes and how that impacts everyone in our state. That's the number one cause of complaint, property taxes. You don't hear people complaining about our income taxes or corporate taxes. We're going to try to get a handle on both of those. But Blueprint Nebraska was really clear, and I support Senator Linehan's efforts. I would like to see, and I would like to propose an amendment to just do it for 1 year. We're doing a very innovative property tax cut and other things that we're doing in our state. But I would like to see, and this is what Blueprint Nebraska recommends. When it comes to that, taxes, they want to commission a nonpartisan study to reconsider tax policies. If we implement Senator Linehan's package for 1 year, which is great, we're giving corporate income taxes and we're giving individual tax cuts, which is great. But I think what we need to do is follow what Blueprint Nebraska says. Thank you, Mr. President. And we need to have a commission, a nonpartisan study to reconsider tax policies in order to maximize growth and opportunity for all. The effort would include a comprehensive review of all taxes, corporate, income, property, and sales to identify optimal rates to promote economic growth. And this study, they encouraged us to get it done as soon as possible. And then we would introduce a clean sheet tax program to keep tax burdens as competitive, efficient, and equitable as possible. And I think that's what Senator DeBoer was trying to get at. Let's make this tax cut more equitable. And I want to say thank you all for providing such a great debate that all Nebraskans love to listen to. And I think we can come up with a great package that will benefit more Nebraskans and particularly be an attraction to young families to come to our state. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Nebraskans. This is interesting. I'm in a new spot today. I usually speak on that mic. I sit between Senator DeBoer and Senator Kavanaugh, Michaela Kavanaugh, who is always filibustering. So I always try to I never get the opportunity to speak at Senator Kavanaugh's actual stance here. So I feel like I'm kind of in the sacred grounds of the filibuster here. I also want to give another shout out to Senator Slama for passing the bar. I feel like everyone piled on the accolades on my birthday, so I'm going to jump on that bandwagon and maybe try to embarrass her a little bit. That's a huge accomplishment. Very proud of you, and congratulations on that. I spoke yesterday about this on the mic. So, we're talking about kind of holistic view of this and holistic perspective of the tax cuts. And, I'm intrigued by the bill. I think Senator Duncan and Senator John Kavanaugh, Senator Raybould have done an excellent job, and Senator DeBoer talking about how can we ensure that we're also supporting middle class working families with that. And that is essential that we need to do that as well. And really having a holistic perspective of when we're talking about attracting businesses, attracting workers. Yes, I think tax policy is without a question a part of that puzzle, but it's not the silver bullet. We need to be taking a holistic view in this and a holistic perspective of that. And so that's something I still feel really strongly about. I've also been very appreciative of the conversations I've been having with Senator Linehan. I know I spoke with the governor's PRO office has been able to provide me with some forecasting data, which has been extraordinarily helpful for me as I try to grapple with this. I think the childcare aspect of this bill of this package, I should say, is crucial, especially if we're thinking about long-term sustainability of the workforce. I would love to see that be a little bit more robust, to be honest. But I do like that we are including working families in this package. I think that that's something we need to continue to be mindful of and continue to think about when we're addressing this. I know that there's a lot of work that is going to be done on this bill between general and select. I've had those conversations with Senator Linehan. I look forward to continuing to have those conversations. And I know that there's going to be obviously updated fiscal notes, and the forecasting board is going to be meeting again, I believe, in April. So they're going to be able to provide us with other data and perspectives on what we can expect on that. So with that, I will be voting for cloture for this bill because I am interested in having this conversation move forward to continue this conversation. I'm also going to be looking very closely at the numbers as they come in with the updated fiscal note and from information from the forecasting board as well. I will likely be present, not voting on the underlying bill itself as I await for more information and more numbers on that. But I do plan to vote for cloture on this bill so we can continue this conversation and see what the numbers look like with the updated fiscal note and updated information from the forecasting board. With that, I will yield the remainder of my time to my other roommate, Senator Wendy DeBoer.
Senator DeBoer, 1 minute, 40 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson. Roommate, I didn't hear that the first time in fact, when Senator Duncan has said it all these times, I'm like, why roommate? Roommate. Yes, that makes much more sense now. So I really appreciate Senator Linehan and others getting up and talking about that they're willing to work on this bill with me or my portion and see if we can find a way to fit it in. I think this is a very important thing to do. You all have heard me talking about it for a while now. This is important to me. And I so appreciate that because it's important to me, because the idea is something that has some merit to some folks, that we're talking about it in more detail. We'll continue the conversation. So in a spirit of collegiality and in a spirit of trying to work together, I will in a second withdraw this amendment so that we can take it up on select file. At that time, we should have a clearer picture of our financial situation. We should have a clearer picture of a lot of things. So really appreciate the discussion last night, although I was a little loopy, and again this morning, the discussion about this amendment. We will continue to have these talks to work on this between general and select. So I am going to now, Mr. President, I will now pull my amendment and revisit it and file it for select file.
AM 1092 is withdrawn. We'll continue debate on AM 1063. Senator DeBoer, you are next up in the queue.
Well, this is awkward. I will now thank you for your time. I have already done the thing, pull my amendment. I guess I would say that I will vote for cloture on the bill and the bill for now, understanding that it's a work in progress. Last year, we used to get a lot of just give peace a chance, move this to select. Let's see if we can work on it. So that's what I'm here for this morning. We're going to move it to select, see if we can work on it a little bit more together with our colleagues and see what we can come up with. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Erdman, you are recognized to speak.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that. Some of you realized or recognized yesterday there were several calls of the House that I had to return to come back to vote. I was working on the budget, trying to understand the agency's needs and trying to make sure we make correct decisions there. But when I returned, my desk was covered in papers from the charts and the explanation of the income tax brackets and those things that we're trying to accomplish with 754. There have been thousands of hours put in developing these charts and distributing this information. The Revenue Committee, Senator Breezy, Senator Linehan have worked tirelessly to try to present to us an opportunity for us to reduce our taxes in the state of Nebraska. And I appreciate that, and I will vote for 754. But let me share with you that this really does not move us into a position to be significantly competitive with any of our neighboring states or any other state as well. We may move to 3.99 over a period of years, but if you think the people and the states that we're competing with are going to remain at their current 3.99, you're mistaken. You will never catch up with those people, with those states. So the only way to fix this system is to fix the system in its totality, and that's remove the current system we have and replace it. And I've mentioned it to you many times about the consumption tax. So I've been asked, why don't people in the legislature support this? So one reason, and these are in no particular order, you can arrange them how you would like. One reason is we've never done that. Well, that's not true. Before 1967, we didn't have income tax nor sales tax. So what did they say in 67? We can't do that. We can't eliminate property tax for the state because we've never done that. So what did we do before we're currently doing this? And we say many times here on the floor, we've never done that, so we can't do it. The other issue may be is they haven't taken the time to really sit down and consider this issue wholeheartedly enough to understand what it is and what it will do. It would move us to the front of the line. It would move us into a position that no one could compete with us with their current system they have. And they would therefore then have to adopt the same program that we have, the consumption tax proposal. There may be another reason why it doesn't catch a lot of traction, and that perhaps could be the person who introduced it. That could be part of it as well. But the point is, Senator Jacobson have talked about property tax relief, and people have talked about people leaving the state because of our taxes are too high. Generally, what happens, and you can ask Senator Hardin this question if you would like, when businesses are thinking about relocating or where they should locate or expand, one of the very first questions they ask is, what is the tax consequences of that decision? We in Nebraska have not gained one person that has moved from another state over the number of people who left our state. We have grown our population by refugees and foreigners who have moved here. People don't choose to move here unless we give them the Nebraska Imagine Act, make it available to them, or TIF financing, or some other method to lower our current tax system, because we know it's too high and it's broken. At some point in the discussion, we have to talk about what the solution is and not the Band-Aid on an amputation. So I appreciate all the efforts that the Revenue Committee and Senator Linehan and Breezy and those worked on to get us to this point. And I will vote for this because once we get to 26, thank you.
Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak. Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank Senator Erdman. I actually love what he said. And about, we have to be competitive. And that's why looking at this tax cut, both for individuals and corporations, should probably be done with a one-year scope. And then we can be more nimble and flexible and watch what our competitive states are doing around us. But more importantly, we can do a study. We can get a study, maybe not during this summer, but the following summer, to see how we're faring against our competitors. And I also love what Senator Erdman talked about refugees. The state of Nebraska has always been a welcoming state for refugees. The city of Lincoln has been a refugee relocation hub ever since I was a little kid, growing up with kids from Cuba and then kids from Vietnam. And it has really enriched our city of Lincoln and has enriched our state of Nebraska. We talk about becoming a more welcoming state. Blueprint Nebraska was pretty clear on that, inclusivity and diversity. But when we enact legislation that really divides us rather than unites us, that's problematic. When we tell one very diverse group of population you're not welcome here, that impedes our ability to be a welcoming state. Refugee relocation has been an essential part of our economic growth and development. And unfortunately, with refugee relocation, it did take a tumble under President Trump's administration, where we went from 90,000 refugees being relocated all throughout the United States down to 17,000. And then we instituted the Muslim ban, and it went down to 13,000. How do I know this? I traveled to Jordan, representing Oxfam America and Sisters on the Planet Ambassador, and visited the Syrian refugee camps, talking to refugees who were turned away as they were ready to board the plane only because they were Muslim. That's a primary factor in deterrent. And if I'd like to take some of my time, I'd like to ask Senator Von Gillern a question, please.
Senator Von Gillern, will you yield?
I will.
Thank you, Senator. You and I had a conversation, and we've been following up on a conversation, how to make Nebraska more attractive for corporations. And you said, we know that when we give corporate tax cuts, it's like honey for bees, that you attract lots of corporations. And I said, tell me the states that have enacted these great corporate tax cuts, and what have they done? Have they attracted new businesses? And while you were researching, I was researching and reaching out to other research places. Tell me the states that have been successful, like the numbers, job growth, economic development, increases in their GDP, et cetera. And so I know you were going to talk about it, and I wanted to give you a chance to do so.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have the specific answers for you yet on the states. Obviously doing a lot of research yesterday and gathering some thoughts and some data together. What we do know is that the states that have been the most progressive, and I use the term progressive, we got in an interesting conversation yesterday with Senator DeBoer about progressive versus regressive. But when I say progressive, I mean being aggressive in cutting their taxes. We know that those states have seen the greatest growth across the nation. States like Texas and Florida and Oregon and some of the others that have cut their taxes have seen a great surge of increase in population, and we know that those folks aren't coming without jobs. So it's a natural delineator to say that those two have gone together. And I was having a conversation with Senator Walz a little bit ago, and I said,
1 minute.
It's just expressing that somehow we've lost the connection between corporations and people. And the fact is that most people work for companies. Most people are not self-employed. There are a lot of people that are self-employed. and those folks are certainly interested in finding a friendly tax environment in which to work. But it's certainly, people will not move unless they can find a job. And if the tax environment is friendly for corporations, we know that that will draw people also. So I'm drawing the delineator between those two.
Well, you know, and I thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. And I know I had quoted Moody's study, co-founder of Moody's Analytics, and they talk that that increasing the after-tax income of businesses typically does not create much incentive for them to hire more workers in order to produce more, because production depends primarily on their ability to sell their products, and have found that corporate income tax cuts are not an effective way of stimulating the economy.
That's time, Senator.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Kelth would like to welcome 81 fourth graders from the St. Stephen the Martyr Catholic School in Omaha in the north balcony. Please stand and be recognized. Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I am intrigued and gratified to hear that Senator Linehan will continue to work with members, as she always does, as this package continues to move through subsequent rounds of debates. I do philosophically have a significant amount of concerns about the overall sustainability of this measure in terms of our uncertain financial future, and recognizing the fact that most of the unprecedented nature of our existing surplus is in large part due to the infusion of federal relief funds, and want to be very thoughtful about that structural dynamic before we commit ourselves to a course for very, very expensive ongoing tax cuts. Additionally, I am concerned about the inequities in a few different components of the program design contained in the tax cut package. So again, I think that it is a very, very important first step, baby step, to have some form of a child tax credit available. I have a much more robust proposal that mirrors the approach from the federal government in recent years, and as adopted by I think about 10 or 12 of our sister states, red states, blue states, that recognize if we want to support family values, we have to value families. And when you give a child tax credit to families, it's up to the families to decide how that best meets their needs. So that's why it had broad support at the committee level from the Catholic Conference, poverty advocates. These funds could be utilized by the families for private school tuition. They could be utilized for the families for home expenses if the family decided not to have both parents in the workforce, or it can, of course, be utilized for childcare, which is one of the top economic pressures and concerns that really make families' bottom line that much more tenuous, and that hurt our shared interest in supporting a robust workforce and addressing our workforce challenges. The more that we can do to support working families' opportunities to access quality childcare, that helps not only the families, but our shared economic prosperity. So I will continue to work with Senator Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee about some of the program design aspects contained in the child tax credit and child care tax credit components in the legislation, to make sure, if we are going to commit ourselves to taking that important first step, that those dollars are maximized to go to families in need instead of just 10 or 15,000 families, when we know there are hundreds of thousands of families similarly situated in need of that help with child care expenses. So that's one piece that I wanted to lift up. The other piece I wanted to lift up was what do we do for childless working adults and low-income working families? And The EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, is a bipartisan solution with a well-established track record to reward work and help to address poverty. I can tell you that as a young lawyer, when I was working in the public interest right out of law school, thank you, Mr. President, we were working on a living wage ordinance here in Lincoln, and I was on kind of this speaking tour with members of the business community that opposed that measure, and I was helping to do public education about why the living wage ordinance was important and helpful from an economic justice perspective. And during that thoughtful endeavor, we quickly realized that there was a lot of common ground on the EITC as a way to address economic inequities and as a way to reward work. It has been some time since Nebraska has updated and evolved its approach to the EITC, and as we continue to update and evolve our approach to other aspects of our tax code, we need to make sure that those low-income working families are not left behind. So I'm committed to continuing the conversation and working in good faith with Senator Linehan, other members of the committee, and other stakeholders to make sure that we take additional efforts to improve equity. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak. Seeing no one left in the queue, Senator Linehan, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm hopeful that I can get your green vote on this amendment, which is the part we've been talking about. So we've got the next 20 or 30 minutes to talk about the rest of the package, which I think is important. I think this has been very valuable debate. As I said, I will work with Senator DeBoer and others before we get to select. And my understanding, I think, we won't get to select until after the budget, so we're going to have some time here, and after the forecasting board, so we'll have time to figure out what we can all do and adjustments we can make. So with that, I would appreciate your green vote on AM, and I think maybe the board's hard to read because
1063.
Thank you, 1063. Thank you very much. And call the House regular order.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk?
21 ayes, 3 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Day, Vargas, Dover, McDonald, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Linehan, Senator Day, Vargas, Dover, McDonald are not present. Would you like to proceed or wait? We will proceed. Mr. Clerk, roll call.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting no. Senator Day, voting yes. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, voting no. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Geist, voting yes. Senator Halloran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, not voting. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, not voting. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, not voting. Senator Wishart, voting yes. The vote is 40 yeas, 4 nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1063 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, next amendment. I raise the call.
Mr. President, some items quickly. Motions to be printed from Senator Hunt to LB 78 and 79. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh to LB 81. Senator Hunt to LB 84. And Senator Day to LB 84. Mr. President, your Committee on Natural Resources, chaired by Senator Bostelman, reports Legislative Bill 425 to general file with committee amendments. Additionally, your Committee on Transportation, chaired by Senator Geist, reports Legislative Bill 607, 796, and 234 to general file, 234 having committee amendments. And a notice that the Agriculture Committee will meet in executive session under the south balcony at 10:30. Agriculture Committee, exec session, south balcony, 10:30. Mr. President, next amendment, the second division of the committee amendments, AM 1064.
Senator Linehan, you are recognized to open on AM 1064.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is the rest of the bill. So I'm going to ask, I've given Senator Blood a heads up, and Senator Bostar, Senator Kauth, and Senator Breezy, this is your heads up, Senator Von Gillern. So Senator Blood, would you like to explain your part of this part of the bill?
Senator Blood?
Yes, absolutely. Real quickly, just a reminder that federal retirees works like this. Federal retirees that began working for a federal agency before 1984 are covered by the CSRS. This retirement system requires them to pay 7% into the system, but are not covered by Social Security as the system was created. Those employees that started after 1984 are covered under FERS. Employees under the FERS system are eligible for Social Security. This includes a combination of federal annuities, Social Security, and 401k type of plan. While Social Security taxes were lowered for everybody else, we left out the federal employees. So through LB 873 and soon LB 641, not only will non-federal employees get a break, but federal employees will also get a break, because right now, without this bill, 100% of federal annuities are still subject to Nebraska income tax, and we want to alleviate that. Thank you, Senator Linehan.
Senator Blood, Senator Bostar, would you like to refresh people on your part?
Senator Bostar.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Linehan. So we've talked extensively about this already, but just as a refresher, This amendment contains the child care tax credit and the school readiness tax credit reauthorization. So briefly, the child care tax credit provides a $1,000 or $2,000 refundable tax credit per child to families for child care expenses, $2,000 for households of income of $75,000 or less, and $1,000 for households of income of $75,000 to $150,000. The exception to that is no child care expenses need to be accrued in order to qualify for the $2,000 credit per child if the family is at 100% of the federal poverty level or below. Second provision is a tax credit that incentivizes private contributions for the development and expansion of child care services in Nebraska. That's a 75% credit under normal circumstances and a 100% credit if the child care is being delivered in an opportunity zone or if the child care provider is also serving children that are participating in the subsidy program. And the third provision is the school readiness tax credit. That has two components. One is a refundable tax credit for child educators in order to essentially provide those individuals who are doing this important work, frankly, with the means to survive, considering the poverty rate that exists with those that are participating in that employment. And the second component is for child care businesses, which is a non-refundable credit that goes to, again, increase the sustainability and access of child care services. The other, I'll just mention briefly, the other provision that I have within this package is related to non-resident income. And that would provide for a 15-day exemption for individuals who are employed outside of Nebraska to do work in Nebraska for 15 days out of a calendar year. Currently, if someone were to even pass through the state and do any amount of work professionally, that could be, and it sounds ridiculous, but that could be as little as responding to work emails while passing through Nebraska. Technically, they would be subject to Nebraska taxation and would have to file a tax form and filing annually for that purpose. So this is an incredible burden that disincentivizes individuals to just even come through the state of Nebraska. In particular, one way that we've heard that it represents as a challenge is if a company wants to have a board retreat or a board meeting here in Nebraska, then all of a sudden every single board member from across the country would have to be filling out Nebraska tax forms. If a business wanted to, let's say a business that's located in Kansas wanted to send a team to Gallup to undergo training or team development, all of a sudden all those employees become subject to Nebraska taxation. So this provides for a 15-day exemption. It's a necessary addition to our tax code, and I would appreciate everyone's support.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Also, there's a couple other things in the package. Senator Von Gillern, do you want to cover your minutes? Thank you, Senator Von Gillern.
Senator Von Gillern.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. So the portion of the bill that I sponsored was LB 492. LB 492 allows income tax deductions for the cost of certain property and certain research and experimental expenditures. And what it does is it basically accelerates and allows for the immediate expensing. This is an accounting function rather than having, if you purchase additional equipment or you have R&D expenses, rather than depreciating those as a business over 7 or 10 or 20-year lifespan of that equipment, you can take that depreciation in the first year. What that does is it frees up capital for companies to reinvest that capital within their business, which of course, as we know, results in purchasing of additional equipment and creating additional jobs. This is a piece of legislation that was already in existence that was allowed to sunset, and we are attempting to renew that now. Because of that, there's a little bit of confusion about the fiscal note, and last evening, Senator Wayne pointed out that there's a $45 million fiscal note on this bill. The reason for that is because the expensing of this equipment would happen in that first year. If it was expensed over the lifetime of the equipment, it would be expensed over a number of years, 10 or 20 years. But the net difference is zero to the state as far as tax revenue and tax income. Again, I think this is an important bill. It's important to some of our largest blue-collar employers in the state, companies like Chief Industries and Valmont, Lindsay Manufacturing, Novozymes, AGP. It's important both for ag areas, rural areas, and urban and industrial areas and employers. And it does some of my favorite things, and that is returns. It provides an ROI, provides a return on the investment for the tax deduction, and generates additional growth for our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Von Gelleren. One other thing, we've got the Social Security Center Health. Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Senator Kauth.
Yes. Senator Kauth, would you like to explain the Social Security part of the bill?
Yes, basically these are the Social Security tax cuts that were supposed to start in 2025. We are accelerating that and starting 100% Social Security tax cuts as of January 1, 2024.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
And then the one other thing that's in the package is the SALT fix. So we don't have to pay taxes on the taxes that we pay. So in 2018, I think when tax cuts were passed at the federal level, the federal government decided your exemptions or your deductions, I should say deductions for taxes paid to the state, including income state taxes and property state taxes, could not exceed $10,000, which catches a great number of people in my district, meaning they are paying taxes on their taxes at both the federal level and the state level. And I have not had the mathematic algebra problem to figure out what that rate actually ends up being. If our top rate, even at 399, if we keep this and don't fix this, that means you're basically paying 8% on a portion of your income. So that's the parts of the bills. And
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Debate is now open on AM 1064. Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and just wanted to continue my comments in regards to some proven tax policies that can help to deliver for working families in Nebraska, including a child tax credit, a child care tax credit, and the earned income tax credit. I have bills pending on this measure, on these measures before the Revenue Committee, and I have made my personal priority bill a measure to provide a child tax credit to about 81% of families all across the state. Just wanted to also let you know that the states that after we had an experience during the COVID pandemic, there were a host of different policies put forward to help families address that uncertainty and that economic upheaval. And one of the most widely studied and most effective components of COVID relief was having that child tax credit available to families. And we heard from teachers at the hearing about how taking a little pressure off families helped to make sure kids were more prepared to learn when they came to school. We heard from families who talked about how having that little bit of extra breathing room helped them make ends meet on buying groceries, on paying for childcare, on school needs that weren't covered otherwise, on transportation issues. And I think that's why you're seeing our sister states move in that direction. States with somewhat similar or very dissimilar political landscapes and demographics to Nebraska. 9 states already have a child tax credit. That's California, Colorado, Idaho, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Mexico, New York, and Oklahoma. And I understand that this year Montana's Republican governor also proposed a $1,200 CTC for children under 6 years old as part of his budget proposal, and need to see where that measure is working its way through in Montana. So I just wanted to lift this up because this program is so important to helping families manage the rising cost of living. It's critically important to addressing our state's workforce challenges, which we all agree is Nebraska's #1 issues. And it really can help to advance economic justice, racial justice, and economic inequity that we see in the present in the state of affairs in Nebraska. The other thing that I wanted to lift up was a little bit more information about the EITC as a whole. As I mentioned on my last time on the mic, working with the business community for many years over the course of my career, we have philosophical disagreements about some aspects of our state policy, but we were able to find common ground and consensus on a lot contained in the Nebraska Blueprint, on a lot contained in business development programs, and finding ways to make work pay and lessen reliance on public assistance. And that one of those proven bipartisan policy solutions that should be part of this tax package is an earned income tax credit. The last time we updated and evolved our earned income tax credit in Nebraska, and if I get this wrong, I'm sure somebody will help me to correct the record, but I think the last time that we adopted an increase in the EITC was the last time I was in the legislature. So many years ago. I think it was
1 minute.
Oh, I just had this down, and I'll have to bring that back my next time at the mic. But it's been well over 10 years since we've updated our EITC. And today, Missouri has a 10% EITC. Our neighbors in Colorado have a 25% EITC. Kansas is at 17%. Our neighbor in Iowa is at 15%, and Nebraska remains at 10%. So in light of the commentary in regards to competitiveness regarding the other aspects of this tax package, it's time that we also update, modernize, and ensure that our tax programs that benefit low-income working families and lessen reliance on public assistance and save taxpayers money, that we're also updating and evolving that policy to better meet the rates that our neighboring and sister states have adopted. That's why my measure would move Nebraska to 17% EITC instead of the existing 10, which would put us in line with our neighboring
Senator.
states. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Jacobson, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to rise and speak in support of the amendment and really thank all the individuals who brought individual bills that got merged into AM 1064. Just going down through the list, thank you, Senator Blood, for remembering federal retirees. That's important to people in my district and across the state. And of course, Senator Calth, as it relates to Social Security tax acceleration, of ending the taxes on Social Security. If I learned one thing along the past summer is retirees are in need of every nickel that they have to really survive today when you look at the high inflation that we're dealing with. And so I think this is just that they've paid their taxes over the years. they should not be paying taxes on their Social Security income. I also want to point out that, as I mentioned in earlier discussions, that as it relates to taxation and lowering the rate on lower income people, I really prefer what we're doing here, which is directing the income or directing the benefits to those folks in a different sort of way, such as the child care tax credit, because I believe that's a way to get people back to work and be able to get them productive and be able to solve some of our workforce issues. And I think it's appropriate as I look at child care providers. They're in short supply. It's hard for people to afford to do it, and yet it's hard for the child care providers to survive on the rates that they're charging. And so this, I think, will go a long ways to helping workforce development in our state. So again, the other thing I just want to mention, Senator Von Gilleren raised the part in terms of the non-resident income. I think it's important to point out that many of us do have people that might come into the state and do a seminar. If they live outside the state of Nebraska and we pay them to do that seminar, might be for a couple of hours, technically they owe income taxes, state income taxes on it. Technically, they got to file a return for that. Do they do that? No. Have they technically broken the law by not doing that? Yes. So why don't we clean up the statutes, which is what this bill is doing, to be able to make that a lot clearer. But it's still going to say that those people that are coming in and working from outside the state on an ongoing basis are going to owe us taxes on the income that they generate, even though they don't live in the state, which is done across the country in other states. So I think these are all great fixes. I support them all. This is why, again, I would say let's bring these kinds of measures that have all been vetted through the Revenue Committee and now are coming on up through general file. Let's move this on to select, and then let's go see where the property tax packages are as we bring this whole thing together and with a comprehensive tax fix. So thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, and again, good morning, colleagues. Just wanted to note that I appreciated Senator Kauth's comments in regards to the Social Security components that are part of this tax package. And I think that this is a really important opportunity to note that even when we find ourselves at significant and serious disagreement about a host of issues that are before this body, we can and we should still strive to find common ground on something, to find something to come together to work on. And I did give just a quick word to Senator Kauth yesterday and appreciated her work on the Social Security piece and give credit where credit is due. I think that impacts all of our districts and is appropriate because as we were out knocking those doors, not only are low-income working families getting crunched, but people who've worked hard their whole lives, who've played by the rules, who've done the right things, and who are really struggling in retirement. And that additional extra boost there, I think, can really go a long way as well for our seniors, for our retirees, in providing a little bit of tax relief to ensure that they can live their retirement years with a bit more dignity and humanity in recognition of the hard work that they've contributed to our economy and our communities over the years. The other thing that I just wanted to continue down the path was I did double check my notes. I apologize, I didn't have that statistic handy at the last time. But the last time we updated the EITC in Nebraska was in fact in 2007, 16 years ago, colleagues. We have made dramatic changes to our state tax code in regards to providing tax relief to corporations and individual tax rates, a host of different exemptions, a host of different incentive packages, but it's been 16 years since we updated that. And so We have the resources. The time is right to revisit that measure and to try and bring some additional equity to this tax package. I'm committed to continuing the conversation with the business community, poverty advocates, Senator Linehan, and the Revenue Committee, because I do think that that is an important component to moving this package forward. The other thing that I wanted to note for colleagues, and I'm sure many of you have already enjoyed the benefit of doing a deep dive into some of the publications provided by the Legislative Research Office, and I think perhaps they're one of the best kept secrets in this institution. They do such incredibly comprehensive and thoughtful work about a host of different issues facing the legislature in our state. And one of the publications that I always find to be incredibly instructive as I'm reviewing legislation and preparing floor debate, getting ready for committee hearings, is something called the Districts at a Glance. And this is, I think, such a critical policy tool where it provides information and rankings about each of our districts on a host of different data points: income, age, housing components, family components. And, you know, this is something that I think sometimes people don't always remember about my district in particular. But if you look at the Districts at a Glance and you look at the income components on page 16, you can see that my district, North Lincoln's Fightin' 46th Legislative District,
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, is presently ranked 48th out of 49th districts in terms of overall income, with District 7 and District 11 right around us. And this is consistent with where we've been historically, where North Lincoln typically has one of the districts that is struggling the most from an economic perspective. Now, we have a lot of pride and a lot of incredible working families in North Lincoln, and always have, but we do have needs as well that need to be addressed from an equitable perspective. And so not only have I devoted my career to economic justice and civil rights issues, but these are top issues for my district. These are top kitchen table economic justice issues for my district. And it is what fires the passion and advocacy to ensure that we have equity in these tax packages and advance proven strategies like the EITC. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Duncan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I rise today in favor of AM 1064. I spoke quite a bit yesterday about the concerns that I had regarding the reduction in the income and the corporate tax brackets down to 3.99. We heard amendments from myself and Senator John Kavanaugh and Senator DeBoer with regards to suggestions of how that could be modified. And one of the things that I said specifically in that conversation was that AM 1064, the other separated out part of this package, is something that I think we can all get behind. I think the Revenue Committee did a really good job of the other members on the Revenue Committee putting this together, and we all, I think, sat down and thought long and hard about what we could do to help Nebraska. And Senator Linehan spoke at great length about what this whole package does, and we heard from the other senators about their individual portions. I do think there's a number of things in this that are positive. And whether it's the child care tax credit or other components of this, I just want to make very clear that despite the fact that I did talk quite a bit yesterday and rise in consistent opposition to that portion of the bill, this part of the bill is something that is positive. And so I just want to voice my support for this section of the divided question. I do want to speak also to the fact that I think what Senator Conrad was getting at was completely correct, and that there's also more that we can do to help working families. I think when I was out knocking on doors and talking to folks in the district, I heard consistently that they just needed a little help in a number of ways. And so I do believe that it's important to continue to try to help parents. I think there's a number of provisions we heard as a committee this year that were intended to do so. We're talking about tax credits for diapers and things like that are at least possibilities out there. But we are trying our hardest to find ways to make things a little bit easier for folks in our neighborhoods. And so With that, I would yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak, and this is your last opportunity.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much, Mr. President. Just wanted to continue talking about, I think, how important certain components of this tax package can be to advancing our shared goals towards providing tax relief to working Nebraskans and to charting a course that is appropriate from an overall budget and revenue perspective. So one thing that I do think needs to be put into the public dialogue for potential negotiation, consideration, food for thought as this package moves forward is a recognition. If the governor's office and the revenue committee feel very bullish about the bright economic future that's in front of us and feel comfortable sustaining this level of revenue reduction without impacting education or human services or infrastructure, it would be appropriate to think about or perhaps put some guardrails in around triggers for future economic downturn or sunsets for a potential revisiting of this policy in different increments into the future, maybe the next biennium or 5 or 10 years, to kind of get a sense about where things are at, and to be transparent for future legislatures and for all stakeholders that we would like to be able to provide this level of tax relief. But if the rug gets pulled out from under us in an economic downturn, we need to be really clear that these will be the impacts and consequences if we don't have revenues available to meet the core functions of government. And I want to also connect the dots there. We have yet to see the preliminary budget be advanced from the Appropriations Committee thus far. Well, I guess we saw their preliminary, but we haven't seen the one that they're going to advance to the floor to start the budgetary debate. But when you look at the governor's budget and you look at the preliminary budget from the Appropriations Committee, and I've mentioned it before, and it's worth mentioning again in regards to this very debate, we're seeing education and provider rates that impact every single one of our districts being treated in a preliminary fashion in a manner that perhaps is even worse than they were treated during really steep economic downturn. So if we are at a time of unprecedented economic prosperity, it just makes no sense to me that we would not be providing additional resources to healthcare providers, behavioral healthcare providers, child welfare providers, developmental disability providers all across the state that do historic and important work, and our institutions of higher ed, community colleges, state colleges, the university system, because every dollar we pour in there is also relief for working families. Because if we don't put those resources into institutions of higher education, they have no place to go other than increasing their tuition. And the moms and dads who writes those checks or the kids that are saving for their own college, every time we put that pressure on those kids or those working families, we start to push a high quality public education further and further out of reach, which hurts us and our shared economic prosperity now and into the future. So we have to connect the dots on these big picture budget pieces and these big picture revenue pieces that are part of LB 74 and the tax cut package. So I do think that there can be components in terms of program design, thank you, Mr. President, that provide more transparency and clarity for potential future economic uncertainty and or downturns, which I hope do not come to fruition, but would be solid, proven mechanisms to ensure good program design, whether that's sunset or trigger. Additionally, I want to make sure that we continue the conversation and not be too myopic in terms of some of the specific components in this revenue package, but also look more broadly at some of the other work support programs that we have available and need to be updated out of the Health and Human Services Services Committee's jurisdiction and some of the other economic development components that we will have coming through the legislature as part of the ARPA relief plan or the budget, and some of those other good ideas as well. But I'm running short of time, so I'll punch in again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on the desk?
I do, Mr. President. Pursuant to, Senator Linehan would move to invoke cloture pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Linehan, for what purpose do you rise?
Call of the House, a roll call vote in regular order.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
23 ayes, 1 nay to place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Slama, Senator Dover, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Members, the first vote is the motion to invoke cloture. Mr. Clerk, roll call.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, voting yes. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, not voting. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Geist, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, not voting. Senator Ibaugh, Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Not voting, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 41 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the motion to invoke cloture.
The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. Members, the next vote is on the adoption of AM 1064 to LB 754. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Members, because we are on cloture, the motion before the body consideration is the adoption of AM 906, the entire committee amendment. All those in favor vote aye. Roll call has been requested. Mr. Clerk?
Senator Aguilar. Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Decay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Not voting, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Geist. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Not voting, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 41 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on adoption of the committee amendment.
AM 906 is adopted. Next consideration is the advancement of LB 754 to ENR initial. All those in favor vote aye. Opposed, nay. A roll call has been requested. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Aguilar. Senator Albright. Voting yes, Senator Arch. Voting yes, Senator Armendariz. Voting yes, Senator Ballard. Voting yes, Senator Blood. Voting yes, Senator Bostar. Voting yes, Senator Bostelman. Voting yes, Senator Brandt. Voting yes, Senator Brewer. Voting yes, Senator Breezy. Voting yes, Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting, Senator Clements. Voting yes, Senator Conrad. Voting yes, Senator Day. Voting yes, Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator Decay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Not voting, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Geist. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Not voting, Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Not voting, Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Not voting, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Not voting, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 41 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 754 is advanced to ENR initial. I raise the call. Senator Ibaugh would like to recognize some guests today, 16 from the Overton FFA. They are located in the north balcony. Please rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska legislature. Senator Mosier would also like to recognize 14 fourth grade students from Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Columbus, also located in the north balcony. Students, please rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska legislature. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motions to be printed from Senator Kavanaugh to LB 90 and 92. Motion to be printed from Senator Hunt to LB 103. Senator Kavanaugh 116. Senator Hunt 138 and 157 and 165. Senator Kavanaugh to LB 181. Next item, Mr. President, legislative bill 683. Senator Conrad, pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F, would move to indefinitely postpone legislative bill 683.
Pursuant to the rules, Senator Geist, you are welcome to open on 683.
Thank you, Mr. President. LB 683 proposes a number of changes related to the administration of broadband development programs in Nebraska. LB 683 was introduced as a follow-up to the Executive Order 23-02 issued by Governor Pillen on January 6th of this year. The executive order established the Office of Broadband Coordinator. The order tasked the office to provide policy-level direction related to broadband planning and deployment in Nebraska. LB 683 was introduced to place into statutory form the key elements of the executive order and the policy announced by the governor. As introduced, LB 683 does the following. It establishes the State Broadband Office, which will be headed by the Director of Broadband. This individual will be appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature. The Broadband Office will be housed in the Department of Transportation. All executive and administrative and budget decisions for the office will be made by the Director of Broadband. The office is to provide outreach and collaboration with interested communities and individuals. The office will develop the state strategic broadband plan. It will coordinate state agencies on policy matters affecting the use of state and federal funding for broadband. It will ensure funding is used in a cost-effective manner. It will provide state advocacy of broadband issues on the federal level, and it transfers the responsibility for the state broadband map to the Nebraska Broadband Office from the Public Service Commission. It eliminates a reference that the state broadband coordinator is to be funded from the Rural Broadband Task Force Fund. It also strikes language contained in the Broadband Bridge Act that any federal funds received shall be in addition to state general funds, and that federal funds may not be used as a substitute for general funds. LB 683 contains the emergency clause. The Broadband Office will have the lead in the administration of the Federal Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, which is called BEAD. This is a duty that is being transferred from the Nebraska Public Service Commission program. However, the Public Service Commission will continue to be the lead agency in the administration of the Nebraska Universal Service Fund High Cost Program, the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Program, and the Federal Capital Projects Fund Program. Mr. President, if I could, I would like to now move on to the explanation of the Transportation Telecommunication Committee Amendment AM 870.
Senator Geis, you may continue to speak about the amendment, but it will not go up on the board.
Okay. The committee amendment clarifies a couple of items related to the organization of the State Broadband Office. For administrative purposes, the office is to be located within the Department of Transportation. Language is incorporated that directs the DOT to provide office space, supplies, and other necessary support to allow the broadband office to function. Additionally, the DOT will provide administrative and budget support for the office. The installation, operation, and maintenance of projects shall not be funded by the DOT, except for those specifically designed to meet the state's needs on the state highway system. The DOT is not authorized to own, operate, manage, construct, or maintain fiber optic, broadband, or similar technologies outside of state highway property. The committee amendment adds a new section that provides that the Director of Broadband shall report to the legislature on December 1st of each year on the status of the broadband office and the efforts to deploy broadband, engage in community outreach, and detail any changes to the state's strategic broadband plan. The Transportation Telecommunication Committee is directed to conduct a public hearing following the receipt of the report. Language is added that provides if any final decision of the Nebraska Broadband Office relating to the funding for projects is appealed to the district court, the appeal shall be given precedence on the trial docket over all other cases and shall be assigned for hearing, trial, or argument on the earliest practicable date and be expedited. Finally, the committee amendment amends Section 86-1309, which currently provides that the Public Service Commission shall administer the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Act and federal funds received for the broadband enhancement purposes. The section is amended to provide the PSC shall administer the Broadband Bridge Act and any federal broadband enhancement funds that are designated by the governor. Again, I want to highlight that the intent of LB 683 and of the committee amendment is that the Public Service Commission will continue to administer the Universal Service Fund, the Broadband Bridge Act, and the Federal Capital Projects Fund. Only the responsibility for the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program will transfer to the Nebraska Broadband Office and the Director of Broadband upon passage. This will require the governor to apply to the federal administration of the BEAD program, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, to seek a change in the state administrative agency from the Public Service Commission to the State Broadband Office. Mr. President, that would conclude my introduction of LB 683 and the committee amendment. I would ask you for the adoption of the committee amendment and your support to advance the bill to ENR initial. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk, for a motion.
Mr. President, pursuant to Rule 6, Section 3F, Senator Conrad moved to indefinitely postpone Legislative Bill 683.
Senator Conrad, you're welcome to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just to let everybody know where we are from a procedural posture, I appreciate and understand what Senator Geist and the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee is trying to do in regards to updating and advancing our state's approach to ensuring equitable access to broadband and closing the digital divide, which I know is very important to each of our districts now and moving forward. And just to let folks know, after the rule change, which was adopted by the body earlier, well, gosh, it seems like a long time ago, but just a couple of days ago, I guess, I worked with other senators to file protective motions on the measures that are currently pending on general file, select file, that were designated as priorities, et cetera, again, as a protective maneuver in regards and in response to the body's decision to change the rules in regards to how motions are offered and handled. So that is why my motions are filed here. It is not necessarily to flag or indicate that I'm seeking to kill this measure, but I do have serious, significant, substantive questions about this policy change that I think will come out either through a motion strategy or amendment strategy and over the course of debate on this very important measure. So I just wanted to be clear about the procedural posture and why my motions are on the board there. So again, I think that from a North Star perspective, when it comes to the policy goals of closing the digital divide and ensuring broadband access, particularly for underserved communities, whether that's in North Lincoln or North Platte. I just see Senator Jacobson in front of me, so that popped into my head. We have a lot of common ground and consensus, I think, to come together on, because we know that access to reliable, high-speed internet is absolutely critical for ensuring success in today's life and overall participation in the economy, whether that be conducting schoolwork, engaging in commerce, running a small business, engaged in remote work, ordering things online, or just staying in touch with families and friends, or doing research. We interfacing with your government for any host of different things, from registering to vote to court filings. We have to ensure that we have a thoughtful approach to having access to the internet for all Nebraskans. And there have been many efforts over many years to utilize a shared approach from the federal, state, and local governments and resources shared within to try and advance a comprehensive plan to achieve those goals. So I just want to note, again, the consensus in regards to the policy goals. But I do have serious and significant questions about why we are making this change now from a regulatory structure perspective. So I've had a chance to look at some news reports about this. I've had a chance to review how some of our sister states have handled these issues, and some of the top issues which I'm struggling with and looking for some clarity in the debate as it plays out today is first surrounding continuity. So as I understand it, in large part, the Public Service Commission is currently handling a lot of our broadband access and policy, and has an existing regulatory framework in place to help advance our shared policy goals. So I'm concerned about making this shift and what happens in terms of continuity for that existing work product that has been established over many years and that the Public Service Commission has developed subject matter expertise around. I'm also concerned about any potential duplication of efforts by essentially creating a new state agency to do, or kind of within an existing state agency, a new office within an existing state agency at the Department of Transportation. It's not entirely clear to me how we will ensure that there's not a duplication of efforts between broadband access and work happening at the PSC and then this new proposal to bring some of that work and some of those resources under the auspices and umbrella of the Department of Transportation. And I'm not entirely clear or sure if there is an existing subject matter expertise within the Department of Transportation to address and advance those same policy goals. So I'm concerned about continuity. I'm concerned about duplication of effort. And then I want to talk a little bit about public participation and engagement as well. So I have a bit of hesitation with this proposal, perhaps from a separation of powers perspective, perhaps from an independent public participation perspective. But the third component kind of reminds me of efforts that have come before the Education Committee this year, where people who were dissatisfied with the course that the Department of Education was headed on sought to change our independently elected State Board of Education and bring that under the auspices of the governor. Now, that proposal did not secure significant support at the Education Committee, and I don't think it will move forward. But there was robust conversation around whether or not it was sound and good policy to lessen the people's opportunity to elect independently people who work on these issues, and to have that direct elected representative as a conduit for engagement on these critical issues. So of course we have the public service commissioners that are elected independently by their constituents and responsive to their constituents. So by moving from that framework to an office under a code, I think it's a code agency under the governor's office, under the executive branch, I'm a bit concerned about the lack of independence and engagement shifting away from the current regulatory framework. So that was another issue that I wanted to raise. I'm also trying to kind of sort through different aspects of the fiscal note and trying to ensure and get a clear understanding to make sure that any resources that are put forward in regards to funding this new agency, this new office within an existing agency. I want to make sure that any funds that are implicated from the highway cash fund or roads operations, that there is fidelity to directing those funds which are meant for transportation costs stay with roads and infrastructure. And I just want to make sure that there's no dilution of those critical roads funds to create this new office within the Department of Transportation. So those are some of the top line framework issues, concerns, questions that I have. I know members of the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee have also wrestled with some of those questions, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about their subject matter expertise and how we tackle these issues. And with that, I'm happy to withdraw the motion, Mr. President.
The motion to indefinitely postpone has been withdrawn. Mr. Clerk, next motion.
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 683, introduced by the Transportation Telecommunications Committee. It's bill for enacting the broadband, amend sections 86, 331, 33, and 1103 and 1309. Creates the Nebraska Broadband Office and provides duties, changes, provisions relating to the broadband access map, state broadband coordinator, the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Fund. Harmonized provisions, repeals the original section, declares an emergency. Bill is read for the first time on January 18th of this year and referred to the Transportation Telecommunications Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments. Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Conrad moved to bracket the bill.
Senator Conrad, you are welcome to open on your motion to bracket.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am going to yield my time to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, who serves on the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee, to perhaps respond to some of the questions that I put forward, or to share kind of more of her perspective in regards to what they heard and saw as committee members as this measure moved through the committee process and to the floor today, if she so desires.
Senator Kavanaugh, 9 minutes, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Conrad. I did vote against this bill out of committee, and I oppose this bill. So what this does is takes an authority away from the PSC which is an elected body, and moves it into the Department of Transportation. And as such, we are taking away an elected authority's power, which I just, first of all, disagree with doing that with really not much fanfare. I think there should be significant more fanfare if we're going to take away an elected body's authority and consideration. There is what I view as a manufactured emergency. So the governor issued an executive order on January 6th of this year, and it is to enhancing broadband deployment coordination. It's executive order number 23-02, and it's the broadband coordinator function will operate under the guidance and direction of the Nebraska Department of Transportation and the Office of the Governor, and will operate with the following purposes and charges. Provide for policy level direction related to the planning and decisions regarding development, operation, and sustainability of high-speed broadband service in the state of Nebraska. Work openly and collaboratively with the relevant government agencies and other stakeholders to ensure that broadband deployment is strategic, cost-effective, and that recipients of funding are accountable for the use of public funds. Lead efforts to incorporate participation of and engagement with the communities with critical broadband needs and relevant stakeholders to shape program implementation and operations. Work in collaboration with government agencies to create and maintain an official Nebraska location fabric broadband access map to accurately show broadband availability for all serviceable locations in the state of Nebraska. Lead efforts with the government agencies and stakeholders to develop directives and strategies for best utilization of federal funds, including grants to improve broadband connectivity in Nebraska. Sounds nice. All of that is taking that away from the Public Service Commission. And in 2021, LB 388, introduced by Senator Friesen and co-sponsored by Senators Hilders, Sanders, Brewer, Brandt, Breezy, Albright, Ben Hansen, at the request of the governor, was the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Act. The Broadband Bridge Program, which if you are looking at LB 388, page 3, section 3, line 7, the Broadband Bridge Program is created. The purpose of the program is to facilitate and fund the development of broadband networks in unserved and underserved areas. $20 million annually from the general fund beginning fiscal year 2021. On page 4, line 28, the first priority is a project in the project area that is unserved, not received public. It needs to further support, but has not received public assistance for development of a broadband network. The second priority of the project is in the unserved area that has received federal support. The third priority of the project is in a project area that is an underserved area, and that commission determines has a digital inclusion plan. So the fund is created and appropriated by the legislature and federal funds. So what we are doing by shifting this is giving the governor's office more control over funds and taking away our own authority and taking away the authority of the PSC. That is diluting the separations of powers. It is diluting the authority of the legislature. It is diluting the authority of the PSC, which, yes, is a regulatory body, but this is a program that has sat with them, and they do other programs similar to this. There are arguments that have been made to me that this is a new program, BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. It's a new program, so it hasn't sat with the PSC for a long time. No, it is a new program. So yes, it has not sat with them for a long time. However, this isn't a new thing that they have done. So why are we taking it away? Why are we doing this? Why are we diluting our own power, our own authority? Why are we diluting the power and authority of another elected body and giving it to the governor's office? And not only are we giving it to the governor's office, we are giving it to a brand new governor and a brand new director of transportation. This is not a tried and true tested entity. We have not seen their mantle yet. Additionally, the PSC came in this bill in neutral, as I pointed out to the member that came to testify. It felt like it was a very negative neutral, but it was neutral nonetheless. But they did come in with a timeline of this program. In November of 13th, 2022, BEAD initial award to the NPSC planning funds received. Then November 2022, it has several items outlined of what happened during November. December onboarded first 2 federal employee hires, HR specialist and attorney. Then in January, there were several items again, and I can have this distributed to the full body. On January 31st, 2023, contract with mapping vendor approved by the commission. Okay, so all of that we had in that bill that we enacted in 2021, they started contracting with a mapping vendor. February 6th, broadband outreach coordinator start date. February 13th, initial report due. Must detail planned use for BEAD funding, planned sub-grantee selection process, sub-grantee accountability measures, and staffing reports to fulfill all BEAD requirements. Now we jump ahead. So that was February 13th of this year. This is what the PSC has been doing. Meanwhile, the governor has put out an executive order in January of this year to try and take this away from them while they are doing the work, while they are on a tight timeline with the federal government. So in June, in their timeline, the NTIA is to release the state's allocation based on the FCC map. Then in August, 5-year action plan is due. Must identify the state's broadband access, affordability, equity, and adoption needs and plan to adopt strategies, goals, and initial measures for meeting those needs using BEAD and other funds. So it is March 30th. We moved through this bill. Maybe sometime in April, we pass this. We've got May, June, July, August. We've got 4 months to transition and submit a 5-year action plan to the federal government. We are jeopardizing these funds. We are jeopardizing this program. And we don't have to.
1 minute.
We do not have to do this. We don't have to take action on this. We can leave this as it is. We can let the PSC continue to do the work that they have been doing. We can do an interim study to see if it is more appropriate to shift the authority away from the PSC and to the Department of Transportation. January 6th, the governor put an executive order out to create all of this. I don't even know. I think that was day 1 he was in office. We don't know how this is going to look. We don't know how this is going to work. This is a rushed job. And we should not take away the authority of an elected body without process and deliberation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Frederickson would like to welcome 5 members from the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Omaha, and they are located in the North Balcony. Members, if you would please rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator McDonald would also like to welcome 50 to 60 junior high students representing Jobs for America's graduates from Nebraska. Please rise and be welcomed by your legislature. Senator DeBoer, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. Today we are talking about the Broadband Office and the creation of the Broadband Office. When this bill was initially introduced into the committee, during the committee hearing, I had several very serious concerns about this bill, reflecting similar concerns that Senator Kavanaugh had about moving from an elected group of folks who had for about 2 or 3 years been doing this work and moving instead to an appointed office. I expressed those concerns to a number of folks and had a meeting about them. And there is an amendment to this bill that will put on some of the safeguards which I sought in this case, including having an annual report from the Broadband Office, which is a public hearing that folks can speak to. That is at least something, and I thought was a good concession. And then the other piece, which I think is very important, is to think about the challenges, because what the PSC will do in these cases is someone will apply for putting some broadband in an area, and then the folks who are already existing there will say, no, we already serve at that level. Because of course, there's always these questions of whether we have an unserved, an underserved, or a served area. In Nebraska law a few years ago, we defined those terms to be: unserved is anything below 100 by, or no, sorry, 25.3. Underserved is then up to 100 by 20, and served is 100 by 20. So we have definitions for those. You may think it would be very easy to determine whether or not an area was served, unserved, or underserved. It is not, because as you might imagine, in a number of locations, there may be one place that has service, whereas the rest do not. Or there might be one place that has faster service than the rest of them, or whatever. So we have, the federal government has undertaken, and many of our folks here in Nebraska, including the Public Service Commission, have worked very hard on some mapping that will allow us to determine in a particular area which of the locations in that area are served, underserved, unserved, that sort of thing. Of course, a map is always obsolete the day after it is made because things change the very next day. But it is certainly far superior than the mapping on broadband that we have had in the past. And you can see then that this will be a complicated matter to determine whether or not in some of these challenge processes, the area which is sought to be served is actually served, underserved, or unserved, which is why there has to be a process for challenging these areas, because the main idea is that you can't go in with government funds and overbuild an area that is already served by someone else. That creates the potential for this challenge between the folks who are already serving the area and the folks seeking the government funding and the grants to go serve it at a higher level. So you've set up a situation for a challenge. These challenges can take time because of the complications and the nuances of the mapping structure, as I have mentioned earlier. And so then you end up with this sort of time process. Well, the Public Service Commission has been doing these for the last 2 or 3 years in terms of handing out broadband grants under the Broadband Bridge Act. And they've developed a methodology for doing this. The concern, of course, would be how would a new agency do that? There are other agencies in Nebraska that do handle grants, that do handle challenge processes within grants in a not the same, but somewhat analogous manner. And so in order to expedite this process, because of course these federal funds are only available for a limited amount of time, one of the amendments, which you'll be hearing later about, would allow for expedited appeal of these challenges under the APA in Lancaster County Court, which hears all of our APA appeals. So the amendment would expedite those appeals to try to help get these challenges figured out sooner rather than later in an attempt to get this broadband out. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Speaker Arch, and thank you, Senator Geist, for bringing 683 and the committee amendments. What this bill will do, it will help rural Nebraska with a dedicated director of broadband, something we have not had in the past. This is a direct report to the governor, and they will coordinate with the PSC on broadband issues. The PSC still will have control over the NUSF, USF funds, the bridge program, and ultimately the PSC is responsible for enforcement of any broadband actions in the state. What that means is if a company comes in and builds a broadband system, and 3 or 4 years down the road, there are difficulties with people that put that system in place or they're not operating it correctly, there can be a public hearing at the PSC and there can be consequences for that. With the new director of broadband, they will be responsible for the deployment of the BEAD monies. It is estimated Nebraska will have $400 to $500 million that will go to unserved and underserved areas of the state. This office will be responsible to vet and distribute that money. And as Senator DeBoer stated, there will be a challenge process that can be expedited quickly. But the PSC is still in charge of enforcement. Now is the time to help the unserved and underserved areas of the state. And I would encourage everybody to vote for 683 and the committee amendment. And with that, I would yield the rest of my time to the chair of the T&T committee, Senator Geist.
Senator Geist, 3 minutes, 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to answer a few things. I'm trying to take notes and I'm being asked questions offline. So if I don't get to all of them, I will try to get back and answer some questions. One is that there is it sounded like a confusion that this is going to be under the direction of DOT. It's not. I want to explain how this is going to be organized. This broadband coordinator is actually answering directly to the governor. The administrative work that will be done for this coordinator is housed at DOT. DOT will not direct the budget or the deployment of broadband. That will be done by this coordinator. The coordinator, as I said, will answer directly to the governor, will also coordinate with the PSC, with the Transportation Committee, and with those in the industry who are applying and deploying broadband. So it is an enormous job. The PSC being a regulatory body, it provides regulations over a myriad of functions, not just broadband, not just telecom. It has many other arenas where it regulates. So the thinking, what the state potentially could receive through this BEAD funding that's coming from the federal government is $100 million to $400 million, an enormous amount of money. There is an end date when this allocation and deployment has to be done. And so in order to expedite that, to meet all of the deadlines that come with this influx of federal funding is the reason that this was conceived to begin with, and then the governor's, and then preceded the governor's executive order. The administration of these funds is a huge job, and this coordinator's specific position will be to administer and deploy the funding, but also the ideology, the logic of where these funds will go, working with those in the industry that will do the building of this deployment. And it's interesting, this bill does have an E clause. It is important that we get this person hired and approved as soon as possible. It's ironic to me that we're filibustering a bill that needs to pass quickly because it has been thought of, it has been conceived of quite well, but we need to get this individual in place so that we can start working towards our 5-year plan, which is due in August. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senators Hansen and Clements would like to welcome 60 homeschool students from Lincoln, Nebraska. They are seated in the north balcony. Students, please rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
The right away. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. It is still morning. So I am rising in support of LB 683. This is a bill that I sit on the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee, and there's a few things I want to kind of talk about with this, and part of this is just kind of more conceptual to begin. I mean, so one thing I've been trying to do a quick study on is the broadband deployment in our state and the challenges we've had with that. It genuinely is a complicated process. There are challenges that are, very concrete challenges, like just in terms of from an infrastructure perspective, from a geographic perspective, but it's also, I think, extraordinarily important we do get this right. One thing that everyone can agree, I think, that the pandemic has shown us how crucial having broadband access throughout the state is. I certainly learned this myself in my own profession as a therapist. If you would have told me 5 or 6 years ago that telehealth would be a part of of what I do for a living, I would have never believed you. But with the pandemic, we shifted to that in my field quite a bit. And we've actually found that that's been really effective. And it's actually been a really impactful way to expand access to mental health services, particularly in the rural parts of the state. I had folks reaching out to me from the Sandhills to engage in services. And so this is something that is, impactful in people's day-to-day lives for many reasons. So it's crucially important that we do get this right, and that we are going to be competitive with that. The other things, it's not just telehealth, it's also remote learning. It's also remote work opportunities. I think that, no one can say what the next 5-10 years are going to look like, but I genuinely believe that if we have areas of our state where there is not a competitive broadband access, that's an opportunity. That's an inequity around opportunity. And we don't want to leave folks in different parts of our state out of opportunities just because of what their zip code is. And I think we can all agree on that. So I share some of the reservations, or I did share some of the reservations that Senator Kavanaugh had mentioned regarding shifting this from the PSC to a separate office. I think that obviously a publicly elected board, there's accountability with that is important to have, and we need to sort of continue to have that. I was made, and Senator DeBoer spoke about this a little bit earlier, the amendment on this bill is going to require an annual report to the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee about the progress being made, and that will also be a public hearing, as Senator DeBoer highlighted. And so that is something that is going to create a bit more accountability with this measure. That gave me a bit more comfort with this and the shifting of that. So I think that's a key component. So we need to, so that was actually kicked out of committee with the amendment. So we're not going to be voting on that. But that's something else to be important. The other thing is that, people are continuing to have more and more flexibility in the ability to choose where they live as broadband is getting out there. And I think that, with remote work opportunities, I should say, rather. And so this is part of, I think, long-term planning for our state, is ensuring that we are highly competitive with broadband access throughout the state. So it's a complicated process. There's been a lot to learn on the committee. I've learned all about the wiring, the fiber, the this, that, the other, the 1 minute last mile. Thank you, Mr. President. And so this is not a simple task, but I appreciate the commitment of the committee to get this right. I appreciate the conversations we've had with the governor's office around this. I think that we are all on the same page with big picture goals here. The question just becomes, how do we actually implement this and ensure that it's being done as efficiently and as effectively as possible? Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Bosselman, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, Nebraska. Good morning, colleagues. I sit on the Transportation Telecommunications Committee. This is something near and dear to my heart. As you all know, over 6 years, I've been talking about broadband deployment in the states, me being myself living 32 miles from here, and I don't have it. So this is near and dear to my heart and something that we've been working on for a long time, for the 6 years. So one thing I want to talk about this morning, first off, as we'll talk more during the day, I'm sure, is there was no opposition to this bill. There was no opposition to the bill. Proponents to LB 683, and I oppose the bracket motion. I do support 683, and I do support the committee amendment as well. The proponents is Vicki Kramer, the Director of Department of Transportation, Sarah Meyer, who is Nebraska Rural Broadband Alliance, Julie Bushell, the Ethos Connected LLC, Emily Haxby, who is from Gage County, has done amazing work that I'll probably talk about later with broadband in Gage County. Danny DeLong, who's AARP Nebraska, Lash Chafin from the League of Municipalities, Bruce Reeker from Nebraska Farm Bureau, Nebraska State Dairy Association, Nebraska Cattlemen, Nebraska Corn Growers Association, Nebraska Pork Producers, Nebraska Soybean Association, Nebraska Wheat Growers Associations, Renewable Fuels Nebraska. Neutral testifiers, as Sarah Michaela Kavanagh said, is Dan Watermeyer from the PSC, as well as Colin Robbins from the PSC. Neutral testifiers, Andrew Vinton from Allo Communications, Tip O'Neill from Nebraska Telecommunications Association, and Brian Thompson, Consolidated Companies Incorporated. Again, no opposition to the bill. We have worked on this issue for a long time as far as broadband goes. The broadband office, I feel strongly about that this is the right move. Senator Michaela Kavanagh as talking about the clock, if you will, the things that need to be done by August. The interim director right now that sits there, Patrick Redmond, is doing an awesome job. I've sat down with him several times, talking specifically about the timeline, talking about what is happening, talking about how he's working with the PSC, talking about how he's working with all of the telecoms, all the providers out there. The work that's being done is significant. Nothing is going to be set aside. Nothing is standing still. It is moving. Work is being done and will continue to be done. And that's the great part about what's happening right now is that we're looking to make this a successful endeavor, because we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. Hundreds of millions of dollars coming into the BEAD program to help us deploy broadband across Nebraska. I believe through NUSF, through broadband support, there's probably already been nearly $700 million that's been deployed, that's been available to providers, that's been out there. What the BEAD program will do is take that next step. And the person the director that's in the BEAD office, or in the broadband office, has to have the drive, the tenacity, the vision, the work, along with the colleagues, the people who are going to work with them, to maybe go outside of the box a little bit, to really drive and go after it. And this is the only thing they're going to have to do. The PSC, thank you for what they're doing, but the PSC already has a whole bunch of things they're doing. And oh, by the way, the PSC has only done the Bridge Act and the capital projects for a little over 2 years. So this isn't something they've always had. This is something that just came to them within the last couple of years. They've got a whole lot of other things that they're working on, that they're doing. They're very busy. What this does is focuses one office of personnel to strictly focus on getting the best opportunities for the state, to the providers, to our telecoms, to those who are out there, to the cable folks out there, getting those opportunities out there for them to build out Nebraska, to identify those unserved areas, to make that difference for Nebraska. That's critical for what we need to do. Again, it's nothing negative on PSC. It's just that there is a lot of work that's got to get done. There's a lot of work that's already happening. Good work. It's moving forward. Things are happening. And I urge you to continue to support, to oppose a bracket motion, to support 683, and to support the committee amendment. With that, yield the rest of my time back to the chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator DeBoer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I realized in my last opportunity, I went directly into the weeds talking about speeds and fabric mapping and all of these sort of things. And I neglected to say some of the introductory remarks which should have been said. For example, with the committee amendment, I support this bill. So just for the record, with the committee amendment, I support this bill. I did not initially support the bill. We worked on it some. I have had more conversations. I've talked to different groups, the PSC, the providers, the different folks. And I think what we would eventually have here with the committee amendment on is a workable process. Would it be my very first choice? Perhaps not, but it's a workable process that I think can get things done. I do think that having one person, the broadband office is what we're creating here. So the director of the broadband office is the broadband office director, which can also be called the BOD. So I would like to say that I support the BOD now, the broadband office director, and having a director who can sort of be the point person in Nebraska to correlate and put everything together into one larger plan, sort of someone who we can say the buck stops here. So having one person, the BOD, who can do that is, I think, helpful for all of the efforts which are being done. As you've heard, the capital projects and the PSC and the NUSF and all of these different things that the PSC with the Bridge Act is going to still do. We have the broadband office. They're going to be in charge of these BEAD funds. There are a number of different things to coordinate, and I think it is helpful to have one person to do that coordination. I can understand that very much. My concern, of course, was always with these challenge processes. I think we have come up with a solution to make those go a little faster because we only have a certain amount of time to use these BEAD funds, and if the challenge process were to be drug out over a period of time, going to district court every time you have a disagreement, well, that wouldn't help us to get broadband out. But since getting broadband out is the most important thing, and that is, we all agree on that. I think Senator Michaela Cavanaugh agrees with that. I think Senator Geist agrees with, in fact, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, is your goal ultimately to get broadband out everywhere?
In this particular instance, my goal is to stop taking away the authority of an elected body and giving it to the governor without much fanfare or investigation or oversight.
All right, fair enough. But as a general premise, as a member of the Telecommunications and Transportation Committee.
Yes, the entire reason I wanted to serve on that committee, and I've served on it for 5 years, is because of my interest in broadband deployment.
Absolutely. I thought I knew that about you. Thank you very much. Yep. Senator Geist, would you yield to a question?
Senator Geist, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Geist, with respect to broadband, what's the most important thing?
That everyone has it.
Exactly right. So you can see that all of us here in the Transportation and Telecommunications Committee, we're all interested in making sure that we get broadband out as quickly as possible. The only thing that we disagree with each other about usually, because it happens on a number of different occasions as we're working this out, is how to do that. And so we're all trying to develop the way to do this and figure out the best way to do it. I think that there is something to be said about having a director, a BOD, who can direct the broadband office and tell us, give us some guidance, give us some coordinating between all the various groups that are involved in this. And for those reasons, I ultimately support the bill. I do very much want the committee amendment on, which will expedite that process through district court as we're going through the challenges to make sure that we get advantage of all of this money as soon as possible, and also because of some transparency measures that were added to that as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So as I've been sitting here listening to the debate this morning, I have several questions I do have. This is a pretty significant amount of money. we're talking $400 million. We have the PSC that is, or should be, responsible for the distribution and broadband. And there have been concerns about the PSC is not accomplishing what we have asked them to do. I want you to take into consideration that this last election, we have three new members on the PSC. So what the past board did may not be reflective of what the new board may do. And we haven't given them a chance to see exactly what their strategy will be. And maybe the new ideas that came to that board may expedite things, and we don't need to do this. Another issue that I'm a little concerned about is we're growing government. We're creating another agency of the government. This is all brand new. There's a new agency. Those people that have the expertise to do these things aren't cheap. They don't work for nothing. And so it's been mentioned today and this morning about the fact that we're putting an elected person, an appointed person in charge of this kind of money. When in fact, we do have elected people that are already put in place to do what we're asking this person to do. So I need to get over that or understand that in a way that I can accept expanding government. I can also feel comfortable with having an appointed person be in charge of almost $500 million and trying to understand how we do that and explain to our constituents that we give that authority to somebody appointed. So it very well may be that this is the right decision, but the first flush, when I look at it, it's a little concerning. So obviously, and maybe I'm wrong on this, we don't have confidence in PSC to do the job. And that may be true. I don't know that. But I'm going to have to be able to understand why we need to circumvent elected officials to distribute $400 million when we think an individual that's appointed can do a better job. So I'll keep listening to see where this discussion goes and if my questions get answered. But at this point in time, it's a little peculiar to me to think that we need to start another government agency to do what we have an elected group already to accomplish. So I'll be listening to see where it goes, but it is, as I said, peculiar. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, some items quickly. Your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 77 is correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Additionally, your Committee on Enrollment and Review reports Legislative Bill 276 and 276A is placed on select file 276 having E&R amendments. New motions, Senator Hunt to LB 184. Motion be printed from Senator Kavanaugh to LB 191, Senator Hunt 195, Senator Kavanaugh 198, and Senator Hunt 206. Additionally, amendments be printed Senator Hunt to LB 461 and Senator Raybold to LB 754 and Senator Dungan to LB 683. Notice that the Appropriations Committee will hold an executive session in room 1307 over the lunch hour, and that the Revenue Committee will be holding executive session at noon in room 1524, and that the Health and Human Services Committee will be having an executive session at 10:30 under the south balcony tomorrow. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Senator Breezy would like to welcome 6 members from the Riverside Public School FFA chapter, and they are located in the north balcony. Students, please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for a motion.
Mr. President, Senator Von Gillen would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Members, you have heard the motion. All those in favor vote say aye. Opposed, nay. We are in recess.